The Mandalorian was created by Jon Favreau, the director who brought you films like Iron Man and Elf, and Dave Filoni, the cowboy hat-wearing director who will be milking the nostalgia of the Clone Wars to the heat death of the universe. Season 1 of The Mandalorian was a grounded, intimate story about a lone gunslinger overcoming his trauma and learning to change, thanks to the love he had for a child and his desire to keep him safe. It was a simple story that anyone can watch without any prior knowledge or context of Star Wars. Not perfect, but a breath of fresh air at a much needed time. I would say that much needed breath of fresh air was a giant reason for the show's initial success. The comparison factor. After a string of divisive, underperforming, and underwhelming Star Wars movies that seemed dedicated to doing the most possible, fans were more than happy to have a Star Wars story that was more toned down and had lower stakes. Chapter 1 through 3 of The Mandalorian Season 1 are a collection of well-paced, emotionally satisfying, and competent writing-filled episodes. I would go as far as to say that narratively they do and could work as a standalone film, or maybe even a Disney Plus special presentation. The tinfoil hat goblin cynic in me thinks that these 3 episodes were more than likely the bulk of the story that Jon Favreau had for the Book of Boba Fett movie he was initially going to do, before Bob Iger took the anthology films out back and told them to look at the flowers. The first episode provides you with your interesting setup filled with mystery and new characters. There is instant iconography, great visual and character storytelling, and the pacing is even and measured. The second episode provides you with further build-up that develops the story deeper. We learn more about how our protagonist Mando operates, his strengths, his weaknesses, and it sets the stage for the dangerous conflict that will soon be coming next. And finally, Chapter 3 gives us your emotional payoff that brings together the setup and the build-up as everything the season has built to so far comes into conflict, to give you a satisfying conclusion that changes our protagonist and leaves us with a story told. Our status quo has been changed, our hero has now begun a new chapter of their life, and the story goes on. Chapter 4 was the strongest of the 3 episodes that will be coming, while indeed being weaker than the first 3 episodes. It does, however, introduce fan favorite character at the time, Cara Dune. Wow, things have really changed since then, and Mando's quest to find a safe place for the child, as well as introducing more aspects of his personal belief system and the fact that the child will never be safe with just anyone or anywhere. He needs a protector. Chapter 5 was when the series introduced an issue with its writing that was familiar with the problems that were plaguing most of Disney's Star Wars. This was also the first episode of the series that was written exclusively by Dave Filoni instead of Jon Favreau, who had handled the first 4 episodes. We had the unnecessary return to Tatooine, Easter eggs, and clunky dialogue that only existed because it referenced something previously said in another popular Star Wars media.
She's got the high ground.
I have the high ground!
Yeah, I remember that.
Boba Fett's feet. I'm sure somebody's into that. These are the calling cards of Dave Filoni's creative influence on the projects he works on. The other stuff, not the feet part. I really hope so. Filoni is a big fan of Star Wars and loves to reference it, and at times his influence can be detrimental to a story. But luckily, Filoni has always had other creators and writers who he worked with in the past to help him iron out these issues in the script or write the script for him as he influences how he'd like it to go behind the scenes. There were times he would occasionally write things, especially when it came to Rebels, but his influence was the biggest thing for a story. You could always tell when Dave Filoni was in the room. Usually he would leave his cowboy hat. This wasn't the case here. I mean, yes, there was a cowboy hat there. Chapter 5 is Dave Filoni's writing debut in live action, and since there was no explicit fan favorite characters to prop up the writing, most wrote it off as the worst episode of the season. And the one thing that does happen in the episode is the character Fennec Shan getting shot and potentially killed, something the actress who played her, Ming-Na, by the grace of Allah, how are you almost in your 60s, thought her character was killed at the time, which likely means Boba Fett's Feet Finder cameo was likely done late in the game. And if it's not, that means the only thing to take away from this episode was the Boba Fett cameo. So, you know, damned if you do, damned if you don't. This episode had nothing to do with Mando. It didn't grow him as a character or build on the world. Its main purpose was to remind you you're watching a Star Wars, and it was in stark contrast to the episodes that came before it and the ones that came after it in service of Mando or his world. It was such a member-berry episode, with the cameo ending being the only thing of value anyone took from it. It's the only thing people talked about. Who were the feet? Who were the feet? Who were the feet? What this was another calling card of Disney Star Wars, introducing something that could be vaguely seen as another thing and string the audience along for however long you need them. But for now, episode 5 was just one episode. No reason to panic. Yet. Chapter 6 was the Prison Break episode that further explored who Mando was as a character, his shady history, how he can be a formidable force of nature when needed. As this chapter closes, we finally put an end to the episodic-like structure of the last few episodes. It was time to return to the serial plot. By the way, this episode was pretty well directed. It was done by Rick Fujima, who had previously done episode 2, and he also did an episode in season 2 that I find personally the best episode. episode. He would also become the executive producer of The Mandalorian Season 3, and whatever problems I have with that season, don't worry, there are many. We'll get to that. Rick was not one of them. I really think he should be given his own Star Wars story one day. He's a damn good director. Let's get back to the point. In a sense, The Mandalorian was like a live-action video game. Get your upgrades, get your armor, go on side quests, and earn enough story points to start the main mission again, and this wasn't necessarily a terrible thing. The issue with this concept, though, is that episodic episodes and serial episodes need to be written at the same level of quality in order to maintain interest in the show. We still need to learn about the world and the characters in interesting ways. If you don't, people will just look at the episodic episodes as the filler, the padding, the ones that were made with lesser quality that they don't have to watch or don't need to watch or view them as a chore. The second more of your episodes are counted as filler that they're a chore to get through, and people are only looking forward to the serial ones, is when your series starts to struggle, which The Mandalorian didn't do this at first, but they suffer from later. A show that does episodic and serial episodes very well is Cowboy Bebop, a series I've been meaning to talk about for the longest time, but I love to announce things and never get to them. It's very Lucasfilm of me. Without getting into too many details, because this video will become an entirely different one, Cowboy Bebop's serial plot makes up for a small fraction of the show's storyline, yet it's tied so symbolically with the episodic episodes as well, because how the characters think, act, behave, their motivations, their regrets, their humor, everything in between about what makes these characters who they are is deeply tied to both the serial episodes and the episodic episodes. Every episode may not be about the troubled past of our characters or building to their next eventual ending point narratively, but every episode helps us understand these characters better and how their past has impacted them and why their choices in the serial episodes make sense with what we know about them and what we've seen them do in the episodic episodes. The series is dedicated to telling us its development that is consistent with both the episodic and the serial episodes. It's a really good series. I really have to talk about Cowboy Bebop. Real damn good show. Real damn good show. Chapter 7 introduced a writing problem that plagues all Disney Plus shows, and that's the 11th hour plot twist / reveal. The client that was the only antagonist the series had for the entire time was gunned down and replaced by Moff Gideon, who is played by Giancarlo Esposito, an actor I dearly respect, but who has in recent years fallen into meme levels of being typecast as the villain of the week. The grungy, down on their luck, desperate remnant stormtroopers were replaced by the normal, shiny, cannon fodder stormtroopers we all know and love and are probably getting sick of at this point. The series also introduced the child's force healing abilities, which
Why are we still here? Just to suffer?
Which that's all I can say about it for now, because the show really just picks and chooses when that matters. You could say, well, he's a baby, but he's also apparently been a Jedi apprentice, and he can comprehend every word everyone is saying by season 3, and he always has apparently. So yeah, this is kind of the instance of world building not making any goddamn sense, but we will come back to that. Chapter 8 was when the show started to change. Gone was the consistent, grounded, serious tone of the show, replaced with humor for the sake of humor, an 11th hour new plot to find a Jedi, long exposition dumping from Moff Gideon about the characters, lore like the destruction of Mandalore, and Mando's first name, Din, Cara Dune's history, and him saying vaguely threatening things, doing nothing, then getting his ass beat. This is all Moff Gideon will do for the rest of the show. Appear towards the end of the season, get that fade run, and then disappear again. Will he be dead? Will he not be dead? Who knows? We have cloning now, but there's no mustache, so I'm not sure. This also introduced a giant issue of Din not knowing what the Jedi were, even though Mandalorian history is deeply connected with the history of the Jedi and the galaxy's history. Like the Clone Wars, that very thing that destroyed Din's life. Din also regularly travels around the galaxy for jobs, in a galaxy that is well aware of the Jedi, especially since the last 2 wars fought in the galaxy were done by Jedi in them. And Din is also aware of other cultures throughout the galaxy, enough to even know how Tuskens communicate, even though they rarely or ever leave Tatooine, as far as the show explains. I got nothing. We'll come back to this Brazos level gaping plot hole later. And finally, the fake out death of Moff Gideon, only for him to return in the post-credits scene with a MacGuffin weapon that was last seen in a different piece of Star Wars media, Star Wars Rebels, in the hands of a different character, Bo-Katan, and an important arc, the unification of Mandalore. And yeah, we're gonna see that again. Remember when I talked about stringing the audience along? Yeah, this started off in season 1. Credit where credit is due though, the episode might have been a downgrade in writing, but did manage an emotional payoff arc for Mando that had been set up throughout the season, and that was Din's arc of growing to trust others and getting over his droid racism. It wasn't perfect, but it was commendable. These facets of his character were heavily touched on throughout the first season.
Well,
well done.
Yet. The question that lingered in the back of my mind in retrospect was wondering if I was impressed with The Mandalorian because it was well written, or if I was blinded by a comparison bias due to the flaws of the Disney Star Wars movies being so publicized and fresh in my mind. Season 2 and sadly Season 3 in retrospect confirmed that sadly it was the latter instead of the former. Season 2 of The Mandalorian is a mixed bag of inconsistent quality, backdoor pilots, cameos, cannibalistic world building, and aggressive key jingling throughout the entire season. Yet despite its many flaws, there were still enjoyable moments to be had in Season 2 of The Mandalorian. One of the best moments to be had, in my opinion, is the Rick Fajimi episode with Bill Burr. It's well directed, well acted, and has the best writing in the series so far. Yeah, I know he shot the Stormtrooper. Okay, it is still Disney Star Wars. We're trying here. Okay, just give Rick a movie. Just give him a movie and create freedom. It was fun seeing all the familiar characters again. It was cathartic to see Luke Skywalker handled in a way that was closer to the kind, selfless hero he was, instead of, whatever that was. And credit where credit is due again, Luke Skywalker, out of all the cameos in the series thus far, was the one that made the most sense and was set up all the way back since Season 1. Even if there are other Jedi, even if there are Cal Kestis, Ahsoka, and all these other Jedi that currently are Jedi but not Jedi but are Jedi, whenever the story needs them to be, Luke Skywalker is the Jedi of the post-OT era. He's him. But Season 2 of The Mandalorian is not well written in comparison to the first season. Largely, it's not well written at all, even though there are a few redeeming, shining moments. And again, Rick Fajima, guys. Rick Fajima, one of the best.